Hey bag ladies and bag dudes, today I'm going to be talking about magnetic snap. So there's two different types that I'm going to be showing you today. The first is a traditional magnetic snap, and I've got my Rockstar bag over here, and if I open up the flap, I can show you that this is what the traditional magnetic snap looks like. And then I've also got my Hyacinth bag over here, and in the flap and in the body of the bag there's an invisible magnetic snap. So you can't see it, but I'm going to show you how the flap closes, and I'll be quiet for just a second so that you can hear the snap closing. So as you can see, the flap I didn't place it against the body of the bag. As the flap got close to the magnet in the body, the magnetic pull took over and then it just closed the flap. So both of these are great options. I'm going to show you how to install both of them, and you can use it for any of the bags that you're making. Okay, first we're going to talk about the traditional magnetic snap. So the snap usually comes in two parts. The male, which has like the little nub that stands out, and then the female, which has the indentation or the little hole in the middle. So generally I like to put the male half of the magnetic snap inside the flap portion, just because it's a thinner piece, and I'm going to hold them sideways just so you can see the male. This one right here is a little bit thinner than the female. So I've cut two pieces of fabric here. I've cut my flap piece, and I've also cut a rectangle, which will be the body of the bag. So this will be the body of the bag right here. I've went ahead and attached the body of the bag to foam interfacing, and the flap is attached to Shapeflex interfacing, so the flap is the thinner piece. Okay, so we're going to start off by attaching the female half of the magnetic snap to the body of the bag. So let me move these out of the way. Okay, so here's the female half of the magnetic snap, and oftentimes they come with a washer, and the washer just has two slits where the prongs will go, and it's just a thin piece of metal, and usually I like to put this on the wrong side of the fabric. So the snaps don't always come with a washer, so I'll show you how to install with the washer and how to install without. Okay, so generally you'll want to use the measurements in whatever pattern you're working on for placement of the magnetic snap. For this demonstration, I'm just going to take my ruler and measure 2 inches down from the top edge and make sure that that's centered. And I'm just going to make a little mark. And that's where that female half of the magnetic snap will be installed. Okay, so first off, if your snap did not come with a washer, I'm just going to go ahead and center the middle of the snap over the marking that I made, and I'm going to draw, move my fingers out of the way, I'm going to draw to the inside of the first prong and to the outside of the second. So that's for marking the prongs if you don't have the washer. I do have the washer, and the washer's handy because I can go ahead and line up that center dot with the marking that I made and then mark where both the slits will be. Okay, so since I have this foam interfacing and it's quite substantial, I'm not going to back that up with any additional interfacing. However, you can if you'd like. I'll show you how to do that when I attach the second half of the magnetic snap to the flap. So I'm going to take my seam ripper, and I'm just going to use the seam ripper to cut holes through the fabric where the two slits are. So I'm just going to insert the seam ripper at the top of the marking and just sort of drag it, and it's going to go through both layers of fabric. And you always want to start off with a smaller slit, because you can always make a smaller slit bigger, but if you accidentally make it too big, you're sort of stuck with that large hole. And I usually like to reinforce the slits that I make through the fabric with a seam sealant. So I have Fray Check right here. Fray Block is another brand, and you just need a little dab, and this liquid just prevents the fabric from fraying. Obviously, if you're using a fabric that does not fray, like leather or cork, no need to use any seam sealant on that. Okay, so I'm going to take that snap and I'm going to slide it through the right side of the fabric. Okay, and then I'm going to stick the washer on the back. So I'm going to open the prongs outward. You can use snap pliers. I like to lean mine up against a table and just kind of push the prongs so that it opens outward. So I'm just going to go ahead and lean that, let me move my table over a little bit. Lean that against the edge. So I just opened the first prong, and I'm going to lean the second edge to open the second. Okay, let me put that back in place. Okay, so this is what it looks like from the front, and this is what it looks like from the back. So that female half of the magnetic snap is installed in the body of the bag. So let me put that to the side for now and pull out the flap. So again, I mentioned the flap only has the thin Shapeflex interfacing. Because it's a thinner piece of fabric with the interfacing, I like to reinforce it with something else. You can use Peltex interfacing, Decovil. You can even use plastic cross-stitch template. So it's up to you what you want to do. I often, in a flap, like to have the magnetic snap installed an inch up from the bottom edge of the flap and centered. So I'm going to go ahead and mark the placement for that right now. Okay, and again, I'm going to use the washer to mark where the prongs will be, and I'll also do that in the interfacing and the plastic cross-stitch template. You don't have to use both, one or the other is fine, but I'll mark both just so you can see how either one will be installed. And this one's a little bit more difficult to measure, so I'm just going to go ahead and cut through the plastic. Okay, so again, I'm going to use that seam ripper to get a hole started. And I'll follow that up with some of that seam sealant. Okay, so again, the reason we're using either the cross-stitch template plastic or the extra interfacing, either Peltex or Decovil, even fusible fleece will be fine, is so the magnetic snap does not pull out of your fabric. So this is a thin layer, it's just fabric and Shapeflex, and we just need to give it a little bit of extra reinforcement. Okay, and I didn't make my slits big enough, so I'm just going to go ahead and backtrack and make them a little bit larger. Okay, and then I'm going to flip to the wrong side of the fabric, and if you're going to be using the plastic cross-stitch template, it'll just go on like that, and you might need to cut a bit back to make sure that you're clear of the seam allowance when you're sewing the flap pieces right sides together. I'm going to put that Decovil on, and I didn't make my slits big enough, so let's make this one a little bit bigger. And I'm going to trim this down a little bit so it keeps out of the seam allowance. Okay, again, I'm going to lean this against my table so I can open the prongs outward. Okay, and this is what it looks like from the right side of the fabric, and that's what it looks like from the wrong side of the fabric, and then you'll just assemble the bag. Again, the flap will be sewn right sides together with another flap piece, and the front of the bag will just be assembled per the pattern instructions. So that's the traditional magnetic snap. Okay, so before I show you how to install the invisible magnetic snap, I wanted to show you my bag again. And again, this is the Hyacinth bag, and there's a magnetic snap here in the flap, and there's also one in the body of the bag. So the actual orientation of the snap in the flap is that it's on this side of the foam interfacing, and same thing on the body of the bag, it's on the underside. So the side opposite where this exterior fabric is. And the reason that I like orienting the snaps that way is because these snaps are quite strong, and I'd rather them go through the extra interfacing before reaching the other snaps so that it doesn't rip through the fabric. I've never had that happen before, but I just like orienting the snaps on the other side of the interfacing, and it's still a very tight close. Okay, now let's talk about the invisible magnetic snap. So the invisible magnetic snap has two pieces, and each metal snap is enclosed in a piece of clear plastic vinyl. So I went ahead and marked on my magnetic snaps A and B, and you can mark anything. You can mark a little smiley face, whatever you want. Basically, I'm marking the side of the snap that is going to close tight against each other, so that would be this, as opposed to repelling, which this side does. So I just like to mark it just so while I'm sewing the snaps in, I don't get confused and orient one of them the wrong way, because if you do that, then when your bag is finished, your flap won't close against your bag, it'll just sort of slightly repel. Okay, so I'm just going to deal with one piece at a time. So here's my flap piece, and I've already cut the flap fabric out, and I've also cut the flap interfacing out. So in this example, this fabric is the part that will be facing outward when the bag is finished and the bag is closed. So this is basically the exterior portion of the flap. So I'm going to go ahead and make a mark for the placement of the snap. I'm just going to choose 1.5 inches up from the bottom edge and centered. And I'm going to make a mark right where I want to install that magnetic snap. So again, because I marked this side, this is the side that has the magnet in it, and for this particular application, I'm going to orient the magnet face down because, like I said, this is going to be the outside of the flap, and this part has to close against the bag, which would be theoretically under here. So I'm just going to center that right on the marking that I made, and I'm going to stitch this around the outside of the clear vinyl about 1/8 of an inch away from the edge, and you can also go ahead and sew that with a second line of stitching, slightly more than 1/8 of an inch, so you have 2 lines of stitching. It's up to you. Okay, so because the magnet is face down against the bed of my sewing machine, which is also metal, you might want to place something underneath the magnet so that it doesn't pull at the bed of the sewing machine. You can use a piece of cardboard. I just have a piece of paper folded up. The thing that you need to remember about this is that you don't want to sew through that paper, so just keep it off to the side slightly so that it's not getting in the way of your sewing machine needle. Okay, so the magnet is sewn in place, and like I mentioned, if you wish, you can sew a second line of stitching slightly greater than 1/8 of an inch. Okay, so that snap is sewn into place, and now I'm going to add the fabric that will be on the exterior side of the snap, and you'll just attach that using manufacturer instructions, and mine is a sew-in foam, so I would just go ahead and attach the fabric to the foam using 1/8 of an inch seam allowance, and then that piece will be ready. Okay. So I just showed you how to attach the first part of the magnetic snap to the flap, and this is the body of the bag. So again, I've cut my fabric out and the interfacing, and I've got that last portion of the magnetic snap. So again, theoretically, that flat portion that I just completed, I would like that to close against the body of the bag. So I'm going to orient that side of the magnetic snap that I marked underneath the foam. And I'm going to sew that in place so that once the flap is finished and the exterior is finished, it'll snap into place correctly. So this is the wrong side of the foam. So this is not where the fabric will go. So I'm just going to mark that as a reminder, as a visual reminder. And again, I'm going to center with my ruler, and I'm going to mark up, let's say, 1 3/4 inches from the bottom edge. So that will be where I'll install the snap. So again, this is the magnetic portion because that's the portion that I marked with the B. So I'm going to flip it down like this. And again, I'm going to sew this clear vinyl to the foam using 1/8 of an inch. And again, I suggest using a piece of cardboard or paper folded in half underneath the snap so that it doesn't stick to the bed of your machine. Okay, so because I marked this foam that this is the wrong side, I'm going to go ahead and attach the exterior fabric to the right side of the foam. And again, mine is a sew-in interfacing, so I'm going to use 1/8 of an inch to secure the fabric to the foam along the outer edge. Okay, so here's my flap piece. This is the exterior of the flap, and this is the body of the bag. And I've gone ahead and installed the magnetic snap so that the magnet side is facing up. And for this piece, the magnet is facing down toward the body of the bag. So as I bring the snap close, it grips really tightly on that second snap. And then I'll go ahead and assemble the flap with the lining portion sewn right sides together and assemble the body of the bag. But this is just the general instruction for installing an invisible magnetic snap, and you can substitute this for a traditional magnetic snap if you prefer. The nice thing is that you can't see the snap in the finished bag, and it's a nice tight close. I like this because once you get the flap close to the body of the bag, it just sort of grabs it and pulls it in. So that's how you install an invisible magnetic snap. I hope you enjoyed that demonstration on how to install the traditional magnetic snap and the invisible magnetic snap. You can use those steps to install either of those in any of the bags that you're making.